You're watching Extras from the Extension on Eagle Community Television.
Hello, I'm Stacy Campbell with K-State Research and Extension of Ellis County. Well, we're here at a cattle working facility. It's getting to be that time of the year where producers may be working their cattle by giving them vaccinations. And that was what I wanted to talk about today, primarily the proper handling, storage, and use of your vaccines to make them more effective. Vaccines, of course, cost money, and if they're not handled and stored properly before they're put into the animal, all the way up to putting them into the animal, they may not be near as effective. So the first thing you want to do on these vaccines is visit with your vet and find out what temperature they need to be kept at when you purchase them. Most of the vaccines nowadays need to be kept cool, refrigerated. So when you do go to pick those vaccines up at the veterinary clinic or feed store, wherever you may buy them, it's best to take a cooler with you. And the cooler, of course, needs to have some cold packs in them. This particular cooler, you couldn't see it, but it's designed to put vaccines in. It's got different compartments to put the different vaccine bottles into, and then we've got our cold packs to transport them home in. And then as soon as you get them home, you want to get them into a refrigerator. And also it's important to keep them in their original box or container that they're in. You want to keep them out of direct sunlight. The UV rays can actually destroy the vaccines. So even when you're transporting them, keep them cool in a cooler, keep them out of the sunlight. And as soon as you get home, you need to put them into a refrigerator. Now let's talk about this refrigerator. Oftentimes we're putting them into the old refrigerator that was in the house for 20 or 30 years, and then we moved it out to the shed, to the barn. And that it's important that we check that refrigerator and make sure that it's cooling properly. A lot of these vaccines, I believe, need to be kept between 35 and 45 degrees. And you're spending all this money on vaccines, and if you put them into a refrigerator that's not keeping them at the proper temperature, these vaccines over time could become basically almost ineffective without being stored properly. So one of the things you can do is you can buy like a little small weather station that monitors the temperature hourly and put that in for about 24 or 48 hours and see if that refrigerator is keeping that temperature constant at that proper range for the storage of your vaccines. Another thing it's recommended on your vaccines is to evenly space them out in the refrigerator so the airflow is good throughout the refrigerator to keep them at that proper temperature. Don't put one right by the fan. It may get too cool there. If vaccines freeze, that's a no-no. We do not want them to freeze. And then once we're ready to work the cattle, we want to get our little cooler out again to put our vaccines in with cold packs to take them to chute side. We want to keep our vaccines in the cooler with the cold pack until we're ready to start working the cattle. And then there's even different types of cold sleeves that we can put the vaccines in if we're using bottles. There's even these little small, like a koozie, to put the bottles into to help keep them cool and also to keep the sunlight off of them. There's also, if you're using the bigger bottles, there's kind of bigger cold sleeves to put them into that you can hang them from on the chute. And then one thing that's recommended is to have a cold pack in a cooler that you're going to put your syringes into. This works really nice. It's just get you a type of cooler. In this case, it's a styrofoam cooler. We've cut some holes into it, and we've got our injection guns to where we can just stick them right down in here, into the hose into the cooler. We've got cold packs into the cooler, and so when we're not using them or between uses, it's helping to keep that the vaccine cooler, okay, and also out of the sunlight. Very important that we try to do these things to preserve the integrity of our vaccines. Also, when we're getting ready to use them, very important to read the leaflet, the label on the vaccine on how to administer it. If it needs to be agitated, how to do that. From what I understand, you don't want to shake most of these vaccines. You want to just gently roll them around, and that will get them into suspension. And then obviously, as we've talked about, keep them out of the sunlight, keep them cool. And then pay attention to the expiration date. If you've had some older vaccines that you didn't use last year, have they expired? If they have, then we don't need to be using them. If you maybe have a partial bottle that you didn't use all of it, you still may be able to use it, but you need to look at the expiration date. And it's also recommended that if you only used part of a bottle of vaccine, to write the date on it when you used it, and then pay attention to whether, how many days after you first used it as to when you can go back and finish using it. If it says 30 days after the first initial use, then you need to try to use it up within that 30-day period. Also, something to keep in mind, kind of common sense, but those some of the vaccines that you maybe haven't used up, or the older vaccines that have been in the refrigerator, if they haven't expired, use those first when you're working the cattle. And then to kind of round this up, it's recommended that you record the date that you've given the vaccine, to what group of cattle, the vaccine name, the batch number of the vaccine, the expiration date. And why do you want to do this? Well, some vaccines require that you do a second booster, and if you write all this information down, then you know when you need to go back and give that second booster, and then you just got those records, especially if you're selling these cattle as that they've been vaccinated, then you have those records available to the buyer. So with that, just keep in mind that we spend quite a bit of money on buying these vaccines for our cattle, but the other step we have to take is make sure that we're taking care of them after we buy them, that we store them at the right temperatures, we keep them out of the sunlight, all the way up till the time that we put them into the cattle. Well, this has been Stacy Campbell with K-State Research and Extension of Ellis County with Eagle Community Television.
You're watching extras from the Extension on Eagle Community Television.